Welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining us for another fun episode of RallyCast. My name is JP, joined here by hopefully some familiar faces, but for the RallyCast booth, two new faces. First, we have Carl Osterlof, let's say the West Coast version of JP, coming from London, based in our Los Angeles office, and Sam Wiley, who's joining us from, I believe, San Francisco, or just somewhere around the world where he is. From Phoenix, there he is. So yeah, really excited for today's episode, continuing on the theme of Imagine If. But because we do have some new faces in the room, just like to have Carl do an introduction. He's our co-host, so you'll be seeing a little bit more of him going down the line. And Carl would be a good idea, like we know each other, but let the listeners know what they're getting themselves into, and introduce yourself.
Thanks, JP. Excited to be here finally on the RallyCast. Yeah, so my background, just to give everyone an idea, is a little bit different, but there is a common thread that runs through everything. I've been fortunate enough to work at some leading tech companies, including Sonos and Apple, as well as IP, obviously. Worked for the Derwent team at Clarivate, both with corporate entities and law firms. But I've done business development, or B2B sales, we'll say, for all of those organizations. And that common thread is that every organization that I've been a part of has sought to push the boundaries in their respective fields of technology, whether that be hardware, consumer electronics, fintech, or IP. So, IP Rally obviously fits the mold there. And I think that we're doing some really exciting things, and I'm really happy to be a part of these discussions to talk about that with our guests, especially today with Sam. So yeah, looking forward to the discussion. Happy to be here from our office in sunny Los Angeles, California, and looking forward to getting into it.
And Sam, for the few listeners who may not know who you are, a quick introduction before we dive in.
Sure. My name is Sam Wiley. I'm a managing director with Tomo. Tomo is our premier IP advisory firm. I think a lot of folks also might be familiar with. Very happy to be here. I've been friends with JP for a long time. We've been in this patent intelligence, IP intelligence space together for a very long time. Actually, we were able to work with each other in the past. Very excited to be here. Very excited about the conversation.
So as we have been listening over the last few episodes, the theme is Imagine If, and we've been kind of posing a few questions, the governance of AI, and then the latest episode around the data of IP and the impact that, an increase of filing and just the exponential rate of growth that potentially could impact patent filings. By the time that it goes through prosecution, that technology may be obsolete. But today's session is actually a little bit of a curveball. We'd like to imagine about the future, but I think with the group that we have, it's really to kind of maybe take a look back and just see where we have been, where we thought we would be, and maybe imagine if we'll get to the title of it hopefully by the end of the discussion. But really, like Sam said in the beginning, we've known each other for quite a number of years now. And as you know, with me, if we ever sit down, have a pint or a cup of coffee, it really is around just the data of patents, the intelligence derived from the importance of spotting potential roadblocks, landmines, or white space opportunities outside of the lens of your typical financial modeling and marketing driven insights. Is what are people, entities, organizations actually deciding to put their neck on the line for? And it's such a strong technical resource and solution resource, but it can also be used exponentially for decision making. So Sam, I'm going to pose the question to you about the Imagine If, but what would your Imagine If be in this space? What do you think, in a sense of looking back, would be interesting in relation to kind of where we're going, really?
Yeah, no, I think it's like you just said when we were talking about this episode, because a lot of us, you and me specifically, JP, but Carl was doing his own thing, not in the IP space, but in the tech space. Kind of got into this stuff around the same time, kind of early 2010s. Maybe we'll even go back to exactly 10 years, 2015. What would we have imagined the world to be like back then, and would we have imagined where we are right now. And I can confidently say I would have been very wrong about most of what I imagined. Something we talked about planning this episode was, where did we think, let's just talk about patent data, the kind of the core thing that we're all sort of interested in here today. Um, in 2015, it was there were some companies that were using it very effectively, and some law firms, even governments and things like that. But um, it was a very specialized, arcane area. There might be one or two people at a company that really got it. Um, if we go back even further, it was really patent search. It was the patent engineers who knew a technology space really, really well and could do these amazing Boolean searches to figure out what was going on in technology space. But the idea that, we might someday have just patent data spread all across the enterprise and being used for a variety of purposes, I think what was pretty unlikely at that time. It felt like we might be heading that direction, but I didn't necessarily think it would be as common as it is now. And when you add in the AI element, that to me was completely unforeseeable back then. We had semantic search, semantic engines, and I think sometimes we would call those learning driven models, but the ChatGPT level AI thinking, I don't know if anyone predicted that. Then they're probably very, very rich right now and probably working with Sam Altman. But yeah, no, I'm actually blown away all the time by how far we've come, and how much further along we are than I thought we'd be back then. Curious to hear what you guys think about it.
Yeah, I remember back when AI was being used as a beneficiary, like you said, with semantic search and AI supported searching, but that was still in the theater of operation that is Boolean. And it was still an overlay or fuzzy logic to help support some of the nuanced processes around building Boolean search, because that was the equipment that you had to fish into the lake that was the data you were trying to get out, which was patent data. And to go even further back in the past, not my live experience, but through my years of speaking to IP leaders and legal leaders in the space, I had a gentleman tell me about back in the late 70s when they had to go to a library with the intervention disclosure right up from engineering, and literally slug through taking out the little Rolodexes and uh, taking out a box and literally Xeroxing the copies of the documentation to get back. And for them, time was the effort of finding any potential art. Now, by the time that they actually gave that back to the engineers and they went back a week later, be halfway down the stack with some coffee stains on it. So the pains weren't so much in the finding of the information, it's also the dissemination and the narrative around said information, the importance of it. And then you had your Thompsons come through and say, let's digitize this information and use Boolean logic, and then that built that. I would guarantee that the users and the case study that I just said probably looked at that as well. That's not giving me the opportunity to see the patents. There's some risks associated with it, and you see that a lot with the transitions of technology now from 20 plus years, 30 years of the Boolean environment to going into this AI acceptance and how that AI works. But in a sense of where we were then, but we saw the value of the data. I think some of us, like yourself, Sam, and I, that's kind of what we would nerd out to, is into the value of the data. But I think you hit the nail on the head, and I'll ask Carl from his point of view on, the comfort you have with the tools that you have in hand. How much does that impact the opportunity to see forward on how much easier it would be with the unknown, really?
Yeah, so it's interesting, JP, that you bring that up. And I'm thinking back as you're speaking, and Sam, you mentioned this too, thinking back, a decade. At that point, I was at Apple, and it was the unveiling of the Apple Watch and Apple Pay. So thinking about the technological leaps that were being made at that point and how exciting that was. And even with that background, even being in that field and being a part of something really exciting and looking at kind of making something easier, making our lives easier, putting the world on your wrist, all the different health benefits of it, all of those things, which there was still so much yet to be uncovered. We're still in a world where even then, I don't know if I would have imagined the impact that AI would have, not only within the industry, but kind of within our kind of everyday worlds. And I think that obviously trickles down to what we're seeing in the IP space. It's funny. when I was at Apple, the reason why I got into the IP space is because I ended up working with someone that had come from uh, the IP space at Clarivate to Apple. And then he went back to the IP space and said, "Hey, I think this is something you'll really be interested in." And that's what led me to that space. And it was interesting kind of going from like an Apple to, a Clarivate, which at the time was, keeping track of, keeping up with all the trends that you were seeing with regard to technology being applied for search and review. But it was interesting going from a company like that, as a tech company that's kind of pushing the boundaries of tech and also shaping popular culture in the process, to saying, okay, this is a space in which I think there's still a lot to be done with catching up to applying some of those technologies within that space. And obviously, it's led us to where we are now. But it is interesting to have seen that paradigm shift kind of play out in an industry where maybe there's a bit more apprehension and kind of looking at the old school way of doing things and moving along into what technology could do to open those doors, and specifically, AI, which is still a very kind of, I would say, wild and newer concept for so many people. So yeah, I think it's an interesting way to see it, kind of with the thread going through those two different experiences.
Carl, you said there it says it's progressing, and Sam, on a vein of the imagine if. I know we've always had conversations and try to push the narrative of getting patent intelligence or patent data, because you could say IP intelligence, and that really could also capture a wider net of trademarks and copyrights and the importance of that, and also trade secrets and the importance of that in brand building and capture, the present value of, let's say that, but for us is about patents. And to get the voice of patents into the boardroom, it's something that I'm seeing more and more, but not at the level that, in my opinion, since this is opinion based, should be a little bit more prevalent. So I'm going to ask you, and to turn this around a little bit on a blast from the past, what would you say? What would you tell your 2014 self, of where we could be if we would have known that we would be in this position right now? And what impact do you think it would have on our listeners that are watching this, to say, okay, what value would it have if I had access to this sort of information?
Yeah, no, I think something we could have done differently back then is I think we tended to self-limit as a profession a bit. We might say, well, it's not realistic to expect a CFO to understand how patent data works. So let's turn this into a pretty chart and see if that lands. I think, and this applies to what we should do now going forward. I think we as a profession, as a industry, if you're talking about IP service providers, I think we should be a lot more self-confident about the ability of something like patent data to be a valid decision-making data point for a broader range of decision makers, whether it's in-house at a company or at a law firm or even judges and government officials. I think there was a lot of self-limiting thought that was happening at all of us, and we were all guilty. It's not just Clarivate or Anography or PatSnap or any one company, and some of those companies have actually done a really good job of not being self-limiting going forward. But I think all of us professionals, I think we tended to think of IP as kind of a nerdy, strange little space dominated by engineers who didn't deserve a seat at the big kid table, and that was probably a bit of a mistake, right? And I think we've improved on that going forward, but definitely, I think now, knowing what we know now, there was a much bigger role for IP data to play even at the time. I think that the tools have gotten more sophisticated. I think the users have definitely gotten a lot more sophisticated. So something we're seeing right now at Ocean Tomo is we're seeing this boom in IP-backed lending and financing, where both sides of the equation are a lot more sophisticated than they used to be. So the banks and financiers are much more knowledgeable when it comes to IP. And so they're asking better questions. If someone comes to them and says, "Hey, I want to offer up my IP as collateral, my patent portfolio, so I can get better terms on this loan." The banks are saying, "Okay, well, let's take a look at those patents. I want to see, is there real value there? And if I end up owning this because it's collateral, what can I do with it?" But likewise, the startups themselves, or the early stage companies and their backers, are also a bit more sophisticated with understanding that they do have IP. So something we used to see is, well, I don't really have much in the way of IP. I have one patent application. It's not even granted yet, but now they understand that there's more patents that could be filed there. That could be a whole family. There's trade secrets. There's their customer list. There's their software. There's their data. So, I feel like the sophistication of these kinds of decision makers is sort of the evidence that we should be more confident that this data does play a big role and that, business people can understand it.
What would you say? Because when it comes to, you've kind of described the progression of, the fear of trying to have a conversation about a very advanced looking subject, because in the end, a patent is an asset. I mean, it's the content within each individual one, which is the one that does your technical head-in, but structurally they're very similar, and there's a lot that you can indicate from the different data points. But what would you say in the last 10 years? Because I remember 2014, you had a lot of the data visualization tools like pre-Microsoft BI, like your size sensors, tableaus, came out and said, we're going to make it easier for you to crunch data. And a lot of that was marketing led, finance led, to kind of feed into the decision makers what your data is doing. Do you think it's cart before the horse in the sense that these sort of tools made it easier to understand and consume the visualizations, and then when you switch to IP data, it's more consumable? Or is it the required answering of the questions by the legal professionals that may have been afraid to do it before, but now they're getting the knock on the door saying, you're the patent professional. Can you give me this information? Where do you think that the turning of the tide that has led to today's environment where that data is more available, maybe more consumable, that could have maybe sped that up in 2014? Or do you think it's purely a tech accelerator?
No, I think the easy answer would be both, right? And that's probably mostly correct. But if we had to pick one, I think the consumers are better informed than they used to be. I think the tools are definitely much better, and I think the ability to get the information in a way that the consumers of data want to see it is definitely playing a role. But I think there's just a lot more sophistication with business leaders when it comes to understanding IP and IP data. Now, I do think that companies like IP Rally and your founder have done a really incredible job of educating outside of the legal profession. So educating the C-suite, the CFO's office, the CTO's office, making it accessible to, we in the business, we call it the business units, right? Like the people actually working in R&D and making cool products. I think IP Rally's done as good a job, if not better than almost anybody, reaching out to those communities and making this accessible. So I think it's a little bit of a trick question, because while I think education has played a role, I think that the folks making the technology did a lot of that education. So I think that's the best I can do with that answer.
Yeah, I want to go back to thinking about kind of the strategic relevance and value of IP within an organization, and having that be understood by your executive suite and your CTOs, and really being baked into the kind of culture of the success of an organization in general. I have to say, I've been on the inside of that and seen that happen. At my time with Sonos. You have a company who really conceived wireless home audio and wireless speakers, for those of you that are not familiar with it, long before the golden age of streaming audio and all the streaming audio services we have now, and before the infrastructural technology existed to support those things. And because of that, the company has seen massive success in being able to be one of the smaller players in the space, but really has shaped what that space has looked like and driven it forward. And I have to say that a lot of the success of that company was because of the IP value and the patents and the concepts and the technologies that were being patented long ago. And that is understood at an executive level. It's understood throughout the organization itself. And, you could see it show up in everyday life there, culturally speaking, and thinking about like how forward looking that is and how important it is for those kind of concepts of what the IP value can represent within an organization being a long-term driver of success. And I think that that's something that tools like IP Rally and others that are out there, making it more digestible and understood. I think that maybe Sonos could have been an outlier with having the IP team, if you will, have a seat at that table early on, and having IP take that level of importance early on, and kind of be in the kind of conversation throughout, but I think it's happening more and more. And you hear it too. I've obviously been to a fair amount of industry events and otherwise in the last couple of years where you have, whether it's, internal counsel or law firms that are working in the space, talking about IP being more and more of a strategic kind of center for organizations. And I think a lot of that is because of the fact that we have these tools and technologies that have made it easier to digest and understand why that is the case. So I've seen it play out, in the real world. And now kind of looking at it from this side, it's interesting to see that those wheels turning with these teams and saying, okay, this is great. We have a voice. We're not just going to be like JP said, the data nerds are kind of the folks behind the curtain that are kind of making this machine churn. There's a real kind of value to this that's understood more than just within our own kind of business unit within the organization. So I think that's an interesting evolution.
Carl, it's interesting. This sort of your comment about maybe Sonos made a good example of a company where IP had a voice, more of a voice than early on than others. There's a rise of a role in house that I think is really interesting. It's a title called product counsel, and there's always been product counsel everywhere, right? But there's more and more product counsel that are really IP counsel with a different name. And I almost wonder sometimes, first of all, I think there's some substance to it, right? I think it's beyond just being an IP counsel, right? It's a person responsible for sort of the managing the risks and helping this product along from a legal perspective. But I meet more and more of these folks who are really, it's really an IP role. And I wonder if there wasn't some clever branding going on there, right? Like I need to embed an IP person on an R&D team, but I need to do it in a way that doesn't sound like we're going to be a buzzkill and we're going to make things more difficult. So I'm going to call it a product counsel instead. My job is still to make sure that we're capturing ideas and turning some of those into patents and some of those into trade secrets. But I feel like companies like Sonos, that those are prime examples where you saw that sort of role, and it may not be exactly called product counsel at all of them, but I feel like that's a trend we've seen in the past couple of years, and that's ushering that along.
Exactly. You could probably see the thoughts turning in my head that it's. I kind of tend to talk with my body language a bit.
Goes off really well on the audio podcast for everyone listening.
Yeah, exactly. If you're not watching this, maybe you can actually feel me through the audio. No, the lines are blurred, right, between your R&D teams, your internal, your in-house counsel, your internal IP teams. But there's a level of excitement with that. You can hear it when that kind of information exchange becomes easier and there's less barrier and there's a little less kind of, you said, the fear of kind of putting an IP person in there, but it's more kind of invited. And I think that is where the magic happens with the kind of R&D and in-house teams working together to kind of, push forward with technologies that are going to strengthen, whether it's, market share or revenue centers, from IP, whatever it might be. I think that there's a little less apprehension around that now, and there's maybe more excitement and collaboration. And I think that that's something that we'll continue to see more of as the barriers get knocked down, because we have kind of a more general understanding of where IP sits within the organization.
Yeah, and I think therefore I am the biggest kind of
Didn't you also
flashing.
just say the cart before the horse a few minutes ago?
Yeah. I'm trying. We're doing a RallyCast drinking game. Every changing idiosms from dad jokes. So because what I also kind of see in this as well, and looking 10 years ago, the requirements and the drivers of organizations haven't changed. It's still, how can we increase market share? How can we ensure a solid revenue stream? How can we ensure we have a happy customer and we're meeting the needs of our customer? And everything is what's driving the organization's growth. So those haven't changed. But like you were saying, what I'm starting to see as well, and it's been maybe just vocalized more, is this need to have a good funnel to capture ideas. An organization that is only as good as the ideas that are nurtured in-house, because that's what's going to lead to a patented product or a differentiating product. So many stories of a Honeywell product that came out because an engineer just had an idea when he was having a barbecue on the weekend, and that turned into a $12 million product. And there's so many tools and so many different requirements and needs and everything that I'm starting to see a lot, maybe more vocalized, because the problem was there 10 years ago, is this information gathering. And it brings us to kind of the final phase of this conversation, in the sense of, with all the tools that are coming out, with everything that's going through, what do you think is, and for you, Sam, in your experience as well, how can the leaders continue to lead, but the disruptors come in and take advantage, in the sense of understanding the opportunity? Is it the data? Is it the education? Is it the information gathered? Is it everything? How are we going to make that next wave of innovative companies that are still excited to file patents?
I mean, so the biggest trend and the most obvious one too is that, every company is quote unquote part of the information economy, right? Um, there's this idea of technology convergence where every company, every type of company is turning into a technology company. Um, banks are technology companies, medical device companies are technology companies, insurance is a technology industry, everything's a
Like the
technology.
little lemonade stand down the road by the kids, that's a technology company. So
If they are on a digital payment platform, they are
They're using Square to take
a
payment, right?
technology company. But to me, I actually think we as an IP profession should start doing something. I think we need to drop this. We're becoming an innovation economy. We're becoming an information economy. It's an IP economy. Everything's an IP economy. If you ask a person on the street, what their favorite IP is, if you did that 10 years ago, no one had any idea what you're talking about. These days, you're going to get Nike or Marvel or something that's not a patent. It's going to be a brand, but you will get a response. Most humans know what IP is now, and they know how important it is to business. So I think it's all of the above. But I do think the more we can drive home with business leaders that whatever business they're in the IP business, I think that's going to be certainly good for our profession. We'll have more of a seat at the table. I think the kinds of data that folks like you and I, JP, love will be more important to decision making. But I think that the main thrust needs to be helping broader recognition that we are all in the IP business now, and that the goal for most major economies should be to continue the transformation to being an IP economy. And most businesses need to continue their digital transformation into being an IP business.
For the
And
record,
how
I
do
love I love the data too.
Sorry, Carl.
No apologies needed. I just
no, but
I need to
Carl,
add there.
I meant that as a compliment, Carl. Like I was just saying, you might have a normal life with normal friends and have normal.
I what I think about when I hear you talk about that. Sorry, JP, didn't mean to cut you off there. Um, is us who are in the IP world. It's like it's kind of it's a bit cheesy, but it's like I tell people, I'm like, look, like all around you, everything around you is tied to some sort of IP. Is there's a patent on this, there's a patent on that. It's almost like we're kind of raising our hands and saying, hey, look how cool this stuff is. And this is really where the heart of the innovation is. And then it touches everything. I think that's kind of the piece that I think is powerful here. And like a really tangible part of talking about that is that, yeah, you're right. It's an innovation economy, but I think it is kind of looking at it as an IP economy and looking at what its place is in the world. And I think that's just, yeah, it's an interesting thing that you touched on because I think it's super relevant. It's very true.
And just to kind of conclude my thought there, I think another thing we used to do back in 2014 was we were kind of scared of the word IP. We called it innovation intelligence or something like that because we felt like we call it IP. It's going to be too nerdy. No one's going to listen to us. And I don't think we need to do that anymore.
Or someone's going to think it's internet protocol. I've had
That's
that
actually
before.
that's a real risk in Silicon Valley. So I'll grant that one as a problem, but I think we need to stop being so scared of calling it IP.
Yeah, agreed.
Sam, what do you think in relation to the regulatory side of things, with the transition of what, like you said before, are there a lot of companies transitioning to, like from back in the day, going from farming to industrial, like that's a big change, and everybody want that change. Now I think AI is that next I'm not going to use the R word, but it's an evolution that is exponentially growing. And there's a lot of people hanging on to that. What do you think, regulatory wise, the impact of, let's say, the EU AI Act or this upcoming administration of the USPTO when it comes to looking at AI in patents? And just the bifurcation of different patent offices looking at things in a different lens, such as the UK being a little bit more stringent in terms of what an AI patent is and much looser in the EPO. What impact do you think that's going to have on companies decide to even file and enabling the data that we need to still be a part of that funnel?
So I'll sort of break that into a couple different parts, and I want to be super clear here that I'm just commenting as Sam Wiley, not Ocean Tomo or anybody else. But this is my personal belief. So on the AI and IP angle, I believe that we will need to figure out some middle ground where using data to train an AI model is neither fair use nor copyright infringement. I think those are not useful lenses from a different era. And I believe we'll come up with something that treats creators fairly as well as allows us to have all these awesome tools that we want to use. I don't know how that's going to be or what exactly it's going to look like. And I'm glad really smart people are working on that, including some of my colleagues at Ocean Tomo. They're very heavily involved in this right now, which is also why I don't want to comment too much one way or the other on different regulatory regimes. But I do think we'll figure this out. I think AI is too powerful and too important to not move forward, but we certainly don't want a world where these people are creating incredible IP on the creative side, which is, I think, always going to be more than half the equation when it comes to the value of IP, need to be rewarded for their hard work. And I think we'll figure that out. In terms of, companies, I think scaling back on the disclosure element of patents, which is why the magic happens, right? We have this trade-off that we all agree to. I'm going to disclose how I did something cool in exchange for a temporary monopoly on doing that cool thing. I think it's really an amazing thing if you really think about it. I think the disclosure element isn't going anywhere soon. I think it's extremely important to think the patent offices have a role in explaining that better, if you will. I think IPOS, the Singapore Patent IP Office, is probably, and it's not just because I was in Singapore last week and I told a bunch of them this, but I really think it's one of the best IP offices in the world, and I think it's a model for how other countries can engage with their local business community to explain, hey, we understand there's some trade-offs with IP, but it's really important to disclose because that's how a lot of amazing things happen. Patent data is a great source of engineering information when you're trying to solve a problem. But I don't really see a risk to the disclosure element from AI necessarily.
And to then add, because I think you just kind of teed me up on that unexpectedly, the disclosure aspect also comes from the understanding and knowledge aspect. And if we're entering an era where engineers and designers and developers have access to this solution database, because I call patents a solution database, that's what we help you find. Somebody's, you know, literally pouring their heart out, solution to a technical problem. And what is the fear? What is the issue that a maybe not well focused intent would lead to somebody say, oh, well, somebody's already done it, even though they don't understand that what's patented may not be separate. So what kind of risks, not to say that everything is perfect, could our listeners that are going through this as well be aware of, in a sense of the education of capturing that idea? And the risks associated, because if you're not bringing up the idea, then you have nothing to disclose, and then that's another kind of way to knock the wind out.
No, I think that's a great question. I believe that there's a lot more work to be done on the education front with the users of patent data for engineering solutions, right? So let's go back to 2014 again. I'll use my old boogeyman, which was treble damages. If you were in 2015 and you were Carl and you were selling this amazing software into big companies, you would inevitably run into a GC who is absolutely convinced that he doesn't want anyone other than attorneys that work for him or outside counsel to ever look at a patent because of the risk of treble damages. And they were not crazy for thinking that. Reasonable minds could disagree on whether that was a good approach. That, I think, precludes a lot of incredible use cases for patent data. And so I think people like you, JP, and you, Carl, I think you have a lot of work to do working with those engineers and their leaders and showing them all the ways you can use this and get the most value out of it. And that's kind of the triple damages angle, just that should I look at patents at all? There was a time where, everyone was a data-driven decision maker, and I realized that not everyone should be a data-driven decision maker, because if you don't know what you're looking at, but you think you're data-driven, you can make a mistake. I do think there's a lot of education and work that goes into training R&D team how to get the most value out of patents. If you do a patent search and you don't, this is your first one and you get a bunch of results, does that mean I should not pursue this line of research because there was, a large number of results returned? Well, of course not. We don't know enough about those results and what they actually tell you. So I think it's a surmountable problem, but it is a problem, right? I don't think you can just set loose anybody on patent data and expect great results. I think there is a bit more training that needs to go into it, whether it's coming from the software vendor or from senior leadership or outside counsel to help non-traditional IP users get the most out of IP. Carl, I'd be curious from your perspective. You have these conversations all the time in your role. I mean, what are you seeing pushback like the way we used to, or is it curiosity, but a little bit of concern about how hard it's going to be to drive adoption?
I was just kind of thinking along those lines, and that I kind of spoke to it earlier, where maybe the apprehension is kind of eased a bit, right? Or there's less of a barrier between, let's say, like in-house teams and your R&D teams, and kind of looking at what role does an R&D team play in kind of doing some of this work up front versus kind of consulting with in-house and vice versa. And I think that the ones that are doing it successfully are the ones that, and we do have a role in this, to your point, of kind of our level of work in educating, whether it's like the software vendor, doing it, or if it's us doing it, in that, if you think about kind of idea generation and kind of think tanking, and thinking about like what these kind of processes and events look like, I think that it is becoming easier for things to be loosened a bit, and thinking about more non-traditional, like kind of, IP team members or users looking into this, and then partnering with, the IP business units within an organization and having really successful collaboration there. Just, an example, it's like thinking about something like image searching, right? And being able to have an R&D person go in and just drop an image in and, run a basic search to see what kind of intel they're going to get, versus sending that to someone on the in-house team who has to then kind of deconstruct the image, put it into terms that make sense, and thinking about how they're going to go about looking and see kind of whether it's freedom to operate or patentability or whatever the case might be. There's a lot of power in that, and it could save a lot of time and headache by having the folks who are involved in the process up front be educated on how to do that effectively, versus kind of waiting until it's further down the line and there's more time and money that's been spent when you're up to that point. So I do think that there is a paradigm shift. I do think that it's continuing to happen, and that you see that there's more close collaboration, I think, between those involved in those sorts of processes, and thinking about that. Hopefully that makes sense, but I think that that's kind of where I see it in the conversations I've had.
That makes a ton of sense. The other thing I was kind of curious, and I think we're seeing this a bit at Ocean Tomo too, is just AI buzz is making these conversations a little easier to have. There's a very real and understandable fear that, I don't want to be left behind, right? I don't want my competitors to adopt a technology that could really make their products better, make their business operations better, and I don't adopt the same technologies. I would hope that that's making your job a little bit easier right now when you're selling a machine learning solution that could really help a company. I think maybe the tide has turned on some of that resistance.
Oh, it absolutely has. Recently, last week, was at, IP Council Cafe, up in Mountain View, and the difference between the way that, let's just say, AI was being viewed this time last year and now is totally different. There is acceptance, and there's a lot more, I would say, kind of nuanced kind of understanding of the nuances between the different types of AI that are out there, and the impact that tools like ours are having on organizations' ability to push innovation forward. It's no longer kind of like, okay, trust but verify, and looking at how these tools and concepts are working their way into the way that business is being done. But it's now it's here. How are we looking at what the future of this is going to be? And I think that folks realize and have realized that it's not a matter of like, okay, we're afraid of falling behind. It's like now we might be behind already if we're not kind of on this train. And many are on the train. The conversations I've had with folks are a lot different in terms of them being able to speak to really like the impact that AI is having and kind of what research they've done on how these tools will shape their own kind of jobs and their own organizations. It's night and day from where it was a year ago. It's moved considerably in the direction of kind of acceptance and kind of being baked into kind of the strategic, I guess, mindset of the individuals who are on that side of it. So yeah, it's good to see, and it does make it easier. I kind of talk to folks about it. I do think that what's interesting about IP Rally is that, we've been doing this since 2018, 2019, and, we've kind of been a trailblazer in this world, and we've built such a solid foundation that now we're looking to the future, and we're looking to a future in which we have a lot more other kind of AI offerings and even companies popping up around us, and being a part of that community is great, but we also want to keep driving it forward.
You said in a year things have changed. I'll say in the last 6 months. And that kind of comes to, we've been talking about 10 years ago. If you have a thought of something now, I think the next 10 years will be within the next 2 years. So I think it's important to just kind of be aware of just the scale of growth, which kind of brings us to kind of the key takeaways and trying to come up with a title for today's RallyCast. I think for me, it's really I hate to say the I told you so, but just the confidence in the nerdiness that we saw many years ago, Sam. But it's really just in the power of good decision making, good governance, and good just foundational information sharing, I think will drive this next generation of solid patent data. There's a lot of stakeholders and levers that need to be pulled. But those are my takeaways. I'd like to see, Sam, if you can kind of just summarize what you thought, and then Carl, and then we'll put our heads together and come up with a name for today's session. But yeah, Sam, go ahead.
Yeah, my takeaway from today's conversation is I say it's gloves off when it comes to patent data and IP data. I think we call it IP data. I think we confidently say to business leaders that you need to understand IP data because you're in the IP business, and you need to use tools like IP Rally to understand IP data. And I think there's no need to beat around the bush anymore and say, oh, we need to manage innovation or we need to drive knowledge management or anything like that. I think we call it IP data and we encourage people to use it. I think if we think about the future, I certainly think we should be more confident as a community, as a profession. And I think we also, to Carl's point about adopting AI and other new tools, I definitely don't want to be left behind. So I'm going to be in favor of taking risks, trying new things. I think we as a profession need to be of that mindset. I think we all referenced maybe there was a little more risk aversion in this industry, IP data, if you will, 10 years ago. And I think we need to be not like that going forward. I think we need to be more open to making mistakes and trying something that didn't quite work out, but learning from it and not being completely safe. I'm not talking about doing this with your patent renewals or anything like that. We're still in the legal industry and there's still risks to be managed and clients to be taken care of. But I think there are places where we could be a little more open-minded, and I think we should do so.
Carl, curious on your thoughts.
Yeah, I guess kind of building off that a bit is I think that for me the takeaway is looking at kind of the continued evolution of the value adds that are being gained through opening it up and thinking about how AI helps to do that and augmenting the way in which different thought centers at organizations, whether it's your IP or R&D teams, are adding value. And I think that we've had this discussion around the IP kind of revolution or thinking about it instead of innovation, and I think that that's going to continue to kind of drive forward. And whether you're thinking about value add from a standpoint of an individual who has got years of specialized experience being able to kind of go through and process this data, whether if it's, let's say, in-house counsel, but not using that time to do it in a kind of cumbersome or manual way, and go back and add their intellectual value into the organization with the time that they're saving, or if it's adding value by getting idea generation to be more high powered up front on the R&D side, whatever it might be. I think that there will continue to be an evolution into the what the value add, or the value of IP is at a broad level in the business world that we deal in. So, and it's been interesting, Sam, to hear your thoughts on that and kind of think about, like you said, taking the gloves off and kind of opening things up a bit, and kind of trusting it. And so, it's good to hear that that's the mindset, because that's what we're here to do, is help kind of assist with that. So.
It just comes down to confidence in your idea, confidence in your process, confidence in your people, confidence in the system, and then confidence in your decision making. Because in the end, that's what is driving the need for the data. It's making the right decision. That's the risk. Do you make the wrong decision? Which kind of brings us to the title. So I was kind of thinking, I was tapping away while we were talking.
Imagine if the future now. I like it.
Yeah. It's like, imagine if the next 10 years is now, or the future is now.
I like it.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully after this session, bring your imagination into reality, and then hopefully drive some change and some progress. And what we would like is to hear from you. Reach out to us via our different channels. LinkedIn, I know Sam's LinkedIn will be shared with a recording. Carl and myself here, where we are, based in London, Carl and Venice. Sam, somewhere great, sunny and warm, exponentially. But yeah, we just, I want to thank my co-host, Carl, my guest, Sam, and you that have been here listening for this episode. As always, an absolute pleasure. I think we've touched on some great topics. Would love to kind of hear everyone's feedbacks and thoughts and suggestions for any more episodes. But Sam, I'll let you walk us out the room.
No, thanks, JP. Thanks, Carl. This has been super fun. Thanks to all our listeners. Hope we get to do this again.
Wonderful. Carl, any last words?
No, thank you, Sam, for once again for joining, and love the conversation. Looking forward to having more of these, and thanks to the host here, JP. I'm looking forward to having more of these discussions, and having everyone tune in for future episodes of the RallyCast, seeing what we can bring to the table. But looking forward to next time.
Yep. Thank you, everyone. See you around. Bye.